I have to say that it bears all the hallmarks of a film which tries and fails to transpose. You said yourself that the book was a sensation and had this sort of extraordinary impact when it first came out. And there are things about the film which you kind of want to admire, but it is extremely flawed. And here are the problems. Firstly, it's directed by Brian Percival, who I think is probably best known for doing Downton Abbey, and the whole thing is very handsome. But handsome in a sort of tasteful and stand-backish kind of way that smothers the story. There are examples of films which take a sort of child's eye look at the horrors of World War II. You think of Boy in Striped Pyjamas or Laura or something like that, and it is perfectly possible to address these horrors, through the eyes of a younger person. In the case of this, it feels like it's somewhat frightened of the subject matter. Now, it's interesting. The scene that you mention, the scene in which they sing that song, is indeed the sort of the most shocking moment in the film, when they're all standing in the Hitler Youth and they're singing that song. But considering what else is going on around it, it needs more teeth. It needs more bite. It is very saccharine, very schmaltzy, very stagey. And the staginess is to some extent deliberate, but that's not enough. The other thing is that he has this weird thing at the beginning of the film. It's narrated by Death, as voiced by Roger Hallam. And you go, okay, and you see Death.
Which is a very striking point in the book.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, in the film, you're introduced to this, rolling clouds and this voiceover, who you very quickly recognise is the voice of Death. And Death shall be narrating these events. But it's sort of like they kind of lost confidence in it. It's like they felt, well, we have to have this, but we don't really know what to do with it. So there are huge sections of the drama in which the voice of Death disappears completely. And then when it comes back, it's totally jarring. And you go, oh, that's right, I remember this story is being narrated by the voice of Death. And although I think Roger Allam's voice, it's a fine performance, it's a very ill-fitting performance, because they've never quite solved the problem of how that voiceover, how that narration, how that weird sort of metaphysical transcendent thing works with the story. On performance level, Sophie Nélisse is terrific. Geoffrey Rush and Emily Watson, we know, are very, very accomplished performers. Slightly hobbled by having to do the sort of, the Germanic accent. Obviously the thing is, when you've got a cast which comes from a number of different places, we've talked about this in relation to other films before. I don't have a blanket ban on people doing that. I understand it's a convention, and I understand it's a convention that occasionally has purposes. But there are large moments in which you think, dramatically, it's just making everything feel a little bit camp.
Do you think it would have been better to get... So you're right, so you've got an Australian and an English woman and a French-Canadian girl.
Yeah, and everyone's sort of meeting in the middle with this sort of Germanic accent.
Do you think they should have spoken German and we had it in subtitles, or do you think they should have spoken
Here's the thing,
in straightforward English?
My feeling about it is that, although I don't for one moment profess to be able to solve the problem of this, there were moments in it in which I just wished that they were all speaking in German. There are moments in which they say 9 for a start. They're speaking English with German accents, and then they say 9, and you go, no, hang on, and that's. There are ways of doing this. There are movies that have done this sort of thing and have managed to get round that problem. This doesn't. So whilst you're watching it, you think, this is very handsome. Its heart is in the right place, because clearly the story is, as you just heard from that interview with Emily Watson, raises interesting themes. But it felt stagey and staid. It felt like it never got its teeth into the subject matter. It felt like it was almost frightened of the subject matter. It was kind of drenched in this saccharine-y, schmaltzy, as I said, staginess, which to some extent, we were talking before about Monuments Men being an old-fashioned film, not in a good way. This suffers to some extent from that same problem. And no matter that the individual elements work, the whole never engages in the way that it should do. And it is not the case that you simply can't deal with some of those bigger themes in a way which is more meaty, more properly involved. It just all felt, and this is such a strange, it felt all a bit chocolate boxy, and then you'd get the voice of Death. And so I thought what it did was it demonstrated that this is a very, very hard book to put on screen, and this didn't manage to succeed.